Today we are meeting in the world's biggest democracy, the fastest growing major economy in the world.
Olaf Scholz is visiting India. That's the German Chancellor. He landed in New Delhi last night and the timing is significant. For the last couple of weeks, Canada has dominated headlines with Justin Trudeau defending Khalistani terrorists, making baseless charges against India and trying to rally the West. Trudeau was hoping to isolate India with the help of his Western friends. But look how it's playing out. The German leader's visit underscores how misplaced those efforts were. Olaf Scholz has joined a growing list of world leaders who are eager to deepen their relationship with India. Unlike Trudeau, Scholz is not myopic. He wants more trade with India. He wants to deepen strategic ties. He wants India's help to tackle China and to keep the Indo-Pacific open and safe. Scholz is also seeking India's help in ending the Ukraine war.
I expressly support India advocating a lasting and just peace. And I am glad of its readiness to use its reliable relations with all parties to contribute to a political solution of the conflict.
Olaf Scholz made that statement earlier today when he met the Indian Prime Minister for talks. The German leader has come with a large delegation of ministers and executives. He is planning a significant pivot. Last week, Germany rolled out a new strategy. It is called Focus on India. The plan describes how Germany should elevate ties with India, and that is the reason why Scholz is visiting. He is here to make that pivot. A slew of agreements were signed today covering a wide range of areas from defense to information technology, clean energy, skill development, also emerging fields like semiconductors and AI. India's Prime Minister said a new blueprint will guide this partnership.
जर्मनी की फोकस ऑन इंडिया स्ट्रेटेजी के लिए मैं चांसलर शोल्ज का अभिनंदन करता हूं। इसमें विश्व के दो बड़े लोकतंत्रों के बीच पार्टनरशिप को कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव तरीके से मॉडर्नाइज और एलिवेट करने का ब्लूप्रिंट है।
So India and Germany are giving their relationship a makeover of sorts. Defense is a major area of cooperation now. Berlin is open to selling defense equipment to India. Before Scholz arrived, Germany made an announcement. It is extending a special status to India. This is supposed to expedite military purchases. It could facilitate a submarine deal. New Delhi may buy 6 German subs. They could be made here in India. Military cooperation is also expanding. Olaf Scholz will travel to Goa tomorrow to visit a German frigate and a supply ship. This German fleet is here for a joint maneuver with the Indian Navy. Militaries from both sides have been engaging in joint drills. What do you think is driving all of this? China's growing acts of aggression, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. Olaf Scholz said that India and Germany will work together and protect major maritime routes.
I am very much looking forward to welcoming the soldiers to Goa tomorrow. The Bundeswehr is also committed to ensuring that the rules-based international order is upheld in the Pacific. The freedom of maritime trade routes applies everywhere.
China is also an issue on the trade front. Germany wants to be less dependent on China. Their list of Chinese imports is quite long. It includes raw materials and a number of essential goods like chemicals, computers and solar cells, even pharmaceuticals and rare earth materials. There are some 200 products on this list where Germany cannot do without China. 200 products. Clearly, this is a problem for Berlin. It wants to reduce its dependency on China, and for this, Chancellor Scholz wants India's help. He is pushing for an EU-India free trade deal.
My government is pushing for swift progress and rapid conclusions, and I'm sure that if we work together on this, Prime Minister, this could happen in months rather than years.
To boost trade and business, Chancellor Scholz is making some changes. Germany will now offer more visas to Indian workers. The annual quota for Indians is being raised. Earlier it was 20,000. Now it will be 90,000, 90. So Germany will issue visas to 90,000 Indian workers every year. Evidently, Olaf Scholz is doing his bit to woo India. And it is a partnership with great potential. India and Germany, they have much to offer to each other. But both sides have struggled to achieve tangible results. Scholz's visit brings fresh momentum to these efforts. He has certainly struck the right tone. It remains to be seen where they take it from here.
प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी और स्पेन के प्रधानमंत्री पेड्रो सांचेज संयुक्त रूप से उद्घाटन करेंगे जो C295
The Spanish Prime Minister is in India. It's a country we don't talk about too often, not unless it's La Liga football or maybe over tourism. But this time it's hard politics. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez landed in India earlier today. Not in New Delhi though. He landed in Gujarat's Vadodara. It's his first trip to India as Prime Minister, also the first by a Spanish Prime Minister in 18 years. It tells you a lot about this relationship. Cordial, but nothing special. Hopefully this visit will add a bit of momentum. But why Vadodara? Because Sanchez and Prime Minister Narendra Modi had to inaugurate a factory there, the Tata Airbus aircraft plant. It is India's first such private assembly line. The production, the testing, the delivery, the repairs, all of it will be done in Vadodara, in the same Tata campus. Sort of like a one-stop location for the aircraft. And what's the connection to Spain? Well, the aircraft is called the C295. It used to be manufactured by a Spanish defense company, but it later merged into Airbus. India has ordered 56 of these planes. 16 will be delivered from Spain. The remaining 40 will be made here in Vadodara. It's a big deal for the Indian Air Force. These planes can play multiple roles. They can carry troops, they can ferry cargo, carry out evacuations, and also the odd patrolling missions. They will replace India's aging fleet of Soviet Antonovs. The first C295 will roll out by 2026, the remaining by 2031. It's all part of the Make in India vision for defense. New Delhi has historically been a buyer in the arms market. But Prime Minister Modi wants to change that. He wants India to become a seller. He highlighted the progress made in the last decade.
भारत में डिफेंस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इकोसिस्टम नई ऊंचाइयां छू रहा है। 10 साल पहले अगर हमने ठोस कदम नहीं उठाए होते तो आज इस मंजिल पर पहुंचना असंभव ही था।
This factory is a big first step. It will create around 3,000 direct jobs, plus it will create a supply chain. As you know, an aircraft requires hundreds of parts and electronics. The plan is to source them from across India, from MSMEs or medium and small enterprises. That will create another 15,000 indirect jobs. So we're talking about an ambitious plan. Once this military order is done, the factory can always make other planes, maybe even civilian aircraft. After the inauguration, the focus turned to diplomacy. Prime Minister Modi and Sanchez held a road show. Hundreds of people turned up to greet the two leaders. Take a look at this. Roadshow done, it was time for talks. Prime Minister Modi hosted Sanchez at the Lakshmi Vilas Palace. Both leaders were joined by quite a large delegation. The Indian Prime Minister talked about deepening bilateral ties. Prime Minister Sanchez noted India's importance in the current geopolitical climate. This is what he said.
Excellency, buenos dias. नमस्कार। उसी प्रकार आपकी इस यात्रा से हमारे संबंधों में एक नई ऊर्जा और उत्साह का संचार हुआ है। आज C295 प्लांट के उद्घाटन के साथ साझेदारी के एक नए अध्याय की शुरुआत भी हुई है।
I am certain that this visit will strengthen our bilateral relations and will honor the weight and influence that both India and Spain have in the world. Complement each other. India plays a prominent role not only in the Indo-Pacific but also in the wider geopolitical context.
Modi and Sanchez have a tough job to turn this relationship into a consequential one. Bilateral trade is around $10 billion. Spain makes up 7% of India's trade with Europe. Robust, but not extraordinary. So what is Pedro Sanchez hoping to achieve in India? Maybe more options. You see, Sanchez has invested a lot in his relationship with China. He visited China twice in the last 18 months, even tried to delay EU tariffs on Chinese vehicles. But other European Union members do not agree with this approach, so they are tightening the screws on Beijing. Prime Minister Modi returned from Russia. On Wednesday, he was hugging Vladimir Putin. On Friday, he was shaking hands with Olaf Scholz. How many leaders can do that? Very few, if any. So tonight, we are looking at India's position in the world. What makes it unique? How did India reach here? And how can we capitalize on it? First of all, India's position is a sweet spot. When it comes to the key players in the world, we have issues, but not conflicts. We have friends, but not alliance commitments. We have rivals, but not enemies. And that is the ultimate goal in foreign policy. Just consider the second half of this year. In June, Prime Minister Modi traveled to Italy. The West had invited him to the G7 summit. In July, he traveled to Russia, had the whole controversial hug with Putin. In August, he visited Ukraine, expressed solidarity with Zelensky in Kiev. In September, he traveled to the US, met President Biden in Wilmington, also attended the Quad summit with Japan and Australia. Then in October, he returned to Russia, this time to attend the BRICS summit. And immediately after that, he hosted the German Chancellor in New Delhi. Just look at the breadth of engagement. Hugging Putin in Moscow, then consoling Zelensky in Kiev, attending a Quad summit in the US, then striking a border deal to reset ties with China, speaking to Benjamin Netanyahu on the phone, then meeting the presidents of Palestine and Iran. Not only are these countries speaking to India, they're actively seeking India's support. This is a sweet spot that I was talking about. Everyone wants to be friends with India, everyone minus Canada and Pakistan. But India can afford to ignore Pakistan. It can also afford to openly take on China. Do you know why? Because of this positioning. Imagine if Justin Trudeau had made such accusations against another country. Had he done so, chances are the West would have closed ranks. But because it's India, it is Trudeau who's isolated, not India. All he got was a customary statement of support, no actions to back it up. Which brings us to our second question. How did India reach this position? Mainly because of three factors. Number one, the economic rise. India has the 5th largest GDP in the world. It is also the most populous country in the world, meaning it's a very lucrative market for exporters. Every country wants to trade with India. They also want to utilize India's young and skilled workforce. Another reason is hard power. India ranks 4th in the Global Firepower Index. It is also a nuclear-armed military. Would you want this country on your side or against you? I think the answer is obvious. The third reason is the focus on the Indo-Pacific. China's intentions became clear in the last decade. They wanted to rewrite the world order. So most countries started looking for alternatives, whether it's for supply chains or investments or military partnerships. Enter India, a stable democracy, a rising economy, and most importantly, a peace-loving country, which is why India is a cornerstone of Western Indo-Pacific policy. Now to the final question. How do you capitalize on this position? If you're friends with everyone, what do? A, look for gains on both sides, and B, bridge the gap between these different camps. We saw an example of that at last year's G20 summit. India lobbied to include the African Union in the group of 20. It was probably the highlight of that summit. We're also seeing examples in Ukraine and West Asia. India has offered to mediate between the two sides to end the fighting once and for all. Plus, unlike China or the US, India doesn't have a vested interest. It is a broker without bias. Like I said, this is a unique position. It's not just neutrality, it's not just strategic autonomy, it is active engagement on all sides. And India did not stumble upon this sweet spot. It was cultivated by design. Last year, Prime Minister Modi laid out his foreign policy vision. He said India would be a Vishwamitra, meaning a friend to the world. Foreign Minister Jaishankar later expanded on it. He said India wanted to be a bridging power, and we are seeing that play out live now. India is a bridge between Russia and the West, between Iran and Israel, between BRICS and the G7. It is a unique position to be in, and it's important to capitalize on it, to harness the geopolitical dividend for India. India Inc. has a new complaint, especially the folks from FMCG companies. They say India's middle class is shrinking. I know it sounds very alarming, so let me explain. First of all, FMCG stands for fast-moving consumer goods. We're talking about things like packaged milk or daily cosmetics or beverages or food items, basically things that sell off fast and cheap, hence fast-moving. Hindustan Unilever is the biggest FMCG company in India, followed by ITC and Nestle. Most of them reported their quarterly earnings recently. The top bosses talked about a consumption rut. Look at the managing director of Nestle India. He said that India's middle class is shrinking, which is why consumer spending is stuck. And it's not just Nestle. Tata Consumer Products had a similar assessment. They said the urban market is slowing down. Colgate also highlighted what they called difficult market situations. Now, all of this raises a couple of questions. One, is it just FMCG? And two, what is the state of India's middle class? Is it really shrinking? Well, the answer to the first question is no, it's not just FMCG. India's auto sector is also struggling with sluggish demand. In September, car sales dropped again. The third straight month of falling sales. It dropped 2.5% in July, 1.8% in August, and between 1 and 2.5% in September. Remember, this is leading up to India's festival season. If sales are down now, it suggests a problem. Which brings us to the second question. Does this mean India's middle class is shrinking? Well, first of all, who constitutes the middle class? I'm afraid there is no fixed definition. Just look at this Indian think tank called Price. For them, middle class is between 1.09 lakh rupees and 6.4 lakh rupees per year. If your income is in this bracket, then you are middle class. In 2021, that included 432 million Indians. By 2031, it is projected to reach 700 million Indians. So that's nearly half of the country, middle class. But Pew Research has a different approach. They said only 66 million Indians were middle class after the pandemic, which is just about 5% of all Indians. Do you see the difference here? Your number will depend on your threshold, which is why calculating the middle class is a tough task. Instead, let's look at consumption. Are Indians spending less than before, especially urban Indians? The answer is yes. Let me quote the Finance Ministry's assessment in September. This is the Union Finance Ministry. They said urban consumption shows some signs of weakness evident in the decline in automobile sales. So consumption is down. But do we know why? Why is it down? For starters, the backlog is over. A lot of Indians delayed their purchases during the pandemic, whether it's cars or gadgets or real estate, but now it's late 2024. Most of that pent-up demand is gone, so the spending appears muted. Secondly, cost of living concerns remain. India's central bank is wary of it. The US Federal Reserve has started cutting interest rates, but the RBI is holding off. They say we can't afford another round of inflation. If the rates are cut, loans could become cheaper, and cheaper loans equals more spending. We haven't reached that stage yet. The third reason is a change in consumption patterns. Yes, FMCG companies are struggling, but Indians are now spending elsewhere, like on concert tickets or cricket matches or travel. Plus, they're not spending as much on, say, sugary drinks or chocolates. They like healthier alternatives, which most FMCG firms do not make. At least the big multinational ones don't. So it's not time to panic yet. The government says things will pick up soon, especially once public spending kicks in. Also, the macroeconomic indicators look solid. The GDP growth and trade The good thing is the Finance Ministry has acknowledged the sluggish demand. The next step is fixing it. Anti-hustle. Have you heard of this term? Apparently it is becoming quite popular. It is used to describe certain jobs where you can work when you like, from where you like, and mostly how you like. So you can do your bit and call it a day. This is an anti-hustle work life, and it has become the war cry of younger workers, the Gen Z, those born between 1997 and 2012. That's the Gen Z. With its oldest members turning 27 years old, this generation makes up a significant chunk of the workforce. But this so-called anti-hustle mode has also earned them quite the reputation. No points for guessing. It's not a good one. Gen Z is widely considered an employer's nightmare, and survey after survey shows this. A new one is out. It says that 1 in 6 companies do not want to hire Gen Z. They say Gen Z is entitled, easily offended, unable to handle feedback, lacking in motivation, professionalism, strong work ethic and communication skills. That's quite the list. It makes you think, what doesn't Gen Z lack? Apparently the ability to make things worse. Over the past few years, the young haven't helped their case by making up these work trends: quiet quitting, lazy jobs, mouse jiggling, where you only pretend to work by moving your computer mouse, that's mouse jiggling apparently, or conscious unbossing, meaning consciously choosing not to be a boss or a manager. 69% Gen Z say they do not want to be middle managers because it's too high stress and low reward. I don't want to question the obvious lack of logic here. Maybe there is a secret sauce to jumping from intern to CEO. Maybe TikTok holds the answers. Who knows? But the fact remains, the young are not seen as great employees. Nearly half of the hiring managers find Gen Z the most challenging generation to work with. This is not to say that all of Gen Z is a personality hire or someone who is hired for their so-called vibes. That's a personality hire apparently. Instead of their skills, they're hired for their vibes. There are a lot of factors at play here. For starters, the current workforce is not ready for Gen Z. Let me give you some examples. Most young workers want time flexibility. A quarter of them say that their productivity peaks at night. So they want to work at night. But in this world of 9 to 5, that's not going to fly. Take for instance job hopping. Young workers are willing to change their careers 3 times. Careers, not jobs. 3 times in their lifetime. But for traditional employers, this is a red flag. Plus, there is generational friction. Every generation thinks that the young are worse than them. And this is only normal. Research proves this, and so do headlines. Until a decade ago, do you know what they were saying about millennials? They're bad employees, they lack work ethic, they're lazy, they're entitled. So circle of life and everything. But intellectualizing aside, my point is quite simple. Companies may not want to hire Gen Z, but they will have to sooner or later because they are the future of work. In fact, by next year, Gen Z will form a quarter of the global workforce. So unless the older generation is planning a coup, they will have to focus on solutions like better training or adaptability. Gen Z has a lot of work to do as well. Historically speaking, this is the most privileged generation. They grew up with the internet, with technology. For them, all kinds of resources are one click away. So about time that they check their privilege. The fact that they can afford to quiet quit or afford to get lazy jobs is because of the workforce that came before them. So insulation, apathy or unrealistic self-assurance is not going to cut it in the real world. Experiences. Because it is good to be passionate about change, but Rome was not built in a day. So if you have any ambition, no matter which generation you belong to, you will have to do the time.